Fujimaru has been a key part of the Grand Order operation up until now. But there will come a time when this journey ends, and I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like FGO's story is nearing its conclusion. We've survived singularities, destroyed alternate worlds, fought some of the most powerful beings in the universe, and even witnessed a completely lifeless version of our own world. Yet somehow, we've never had a proper moment to just hold Mash's hand. I mean, sure, maybe there's been some hand-holding, but you get what I'm saying. Fujimaru and Mash deserve a chance to let their feelings for each other bloom after this insane journey is over. Don't forget, they're still just teenagers. Anyway, what really gets me thinking is this. What's going to happen to Fujimaru after Ordeal Call wraps up, or when Chaldea finally disbands? This thought has been eating at me, especially considering everything Fujimaru has endured, not to mention the politics and scheming of the mage world. Remember, they've managed to bond with hundreds of servants while learning about all kinds of insanely powerful stuff. From alternate worlds like the Servant Universe to singularities, godlike beings, and creatures capable of destroying entire worlds. Sure, Chaldea's summoning system is one of a kind, and Fujimaru's success isn't just about their skills as a mage. But the fact that they've worked with all these heroes and earned their respect? That's a huge achievement on its own. Let's not forget the sheer amount of valuable info Fujimaru has about history, magic, and basically everything else a magus would kill for. Whether they're willing to share or not, that knowledge is a massive target on their back. While Fujimaru is safe in Chaldea, it could be a totally different story once they step back into the real world. Out there, they're practically powerless, and if people start finding out about Chaldea and all the crazy stuff it was involved in, things could get really messy. Remember how Chaldea's staff had to suppress as much info as possible about Fujimaru after they finished their first big mission with the Singularities? If they hadn't, Fujimaru might have been snatched up by the Mages Association for experiments. Honestly, they probably wouldn't have even seen the outside world again. Even fan art has explored this idea, showing alternate scenarios where Fujimaru becomes a test subject because they're the only person in history who's achieved something so insane, literally saving the world. Some fan art even takes it further, imagining Mash turning into an altar as a result, seeking revenge for what happened to Fujimaru. When you think about it, this kind of ending isn't just dark, it's disturbingly plausible. I mean, with the way mages act in the Fate universe, it's not surprising at all. Someone left a comment on one of my videos saying, "Don't think of mages like the wizards in Harry Potter, like the kind-hearted Weasley family." And honestly, that's spot on. In reality, mages in the Fate universe are way more like Death Eaters. Sure, there are a handful who are decent and still hold on to some normal human morals. But when their ultimate goal is to reach the pinnacle of magic, true magic, yeah, eventually, they're gonna turn into complete a-holes. Do you think Fujimaru could actually retire and live a normal life after everything they've been through? Or would they need to go into hiding because of all the groups that might come after them? I'm talking about the Magus Association, rogue mages, or maybe dead apostles, and who knows what else. And what about the people connected to Chaldea? Mash, the staff, would they be targeted too? Would there be anyone willing to step in and protect them? Maybe people like Waver Velvet could step up to help. Sure, it's a lot to think about, but it's also interesting. Now, to dive deeper into this, I think we should take a look at how other MCs handled the end of their Holy Grail Wars as some kind of template in this situation. Every master in the series has their own unique circumstances. There's Kiritsugu, who fought with cold precision for the greater good. Then there's Shiro, who's all about the warmth and inner conflict of his hero of justice ideals, constantly wrestling with them. Seek, the poor guy spent most of his time confused about life before finally deciding to forge his own path. And Hakuno. Okay, I didn't play extra, but it feels like their story might get wrapped up during the Ordeal Call event, so I'm waiting to see how that plays out. But here's what I noticed. All these MCs share one big similarity. They never stopped fighting, even after their Holy Grail events ended. None of them got to live a peaceful life or return to normal. Take Kiritsugu, for example. Sure, he retired from being a mercenary and focused on raising Shiro, but you can tell he was still haunted by everything that happened. It's pretty clear when Shiro finally tells him he wants to become a hero of justice and carry on his ideals. At that moment, Kiritsugu finally looks relieved. And then he dies. It's like he was carrying the weight of the Holy Grail War the entire time, and only when Shiro offered to take that burden did he finally let go. Or look at Zeke. He literally turned into a dragon and disappeared to the other side of the world to guard the Greater Grail. See the pattern? They all went through massive changes and could never go back to who they were before, so honestly, I can't imagine Fujimaru returning to being a regular civilian either. This is also backed up when we visit the Britain Lost Belt, where we really get a glimpse of where Fujimaru's beliefs stand right now. The human heart can easily change, but it will never return to what it once was. Yeah, Oberon said it, but deep down, Fujimaru knows it's true. That's the state of their heart right now. Even if everything goes back to normal, they won't. That's what Fujimaru believes. Even if they manage to save the world, they'll still have to carry the weight of what they've done. Sure, some people might be able to ignore it, but this guy? No way. And it's not just about their mental state. Let's not forget the whole Black Barrel situation. There's a good chance their body or soul is permanently messed up from using it. Every time they use that gun, part of their life energy is drained. Sure, they can replenish it, but this excessive use of the Black Barrel isn't going to be good, especially for their soul. Going back to a normal life? That's not happening. The best they can do is pretend. Pretend they're okay. Pretend they're normal again. Honestly, I feel like things started going downhill for Fujimaru after Dr. Roman's death. Since then, they've been hanging on by a thread, just trying to keep their head above water. Honestly, I feel like this is the key point the author is heading toward in the end. Mash's journey is all about becoming more human, while Fujimaru is slowly losing their humanity along the way. Just look at Mash in part 1. She started out as a stiff, good girl character with a short lifespan. But over time, she grew into someone who understands fear, grasps the philosophy of life and death, and even gains a normal human lifespan. Meanwhile, Fujimaru started off as someone deeply human, but by the end of part 1, their mental state was already cracking from being dragged into another global crisis. And that's not even the worst of it. They had to make choices between two worlds and more life questions. It's so reminiscent of Kiritsugu's inner conflict. And look at what happened to him. He ended up completely dead inside. I feel like that's where our MC is headed too. Sure, they smile, but like I said, it's all just a mask to keep pretending everything's fine. At this point in Fujimaru's journey, they've already faced plenty of mental hurdles, but they're still not quite on Kiritsugu's level of being dead inside. At least, that's what I think, though I don't play the JP version, so I don't really know the details. Still, we've gotten glimpses of what's in their heart, and it's not hard to imagine where the author might be heading with their character, someone who ends up completely dead inside, but in the last moment they'll find their humanity again. Now back to the question, can Fujimaru retire from the mission? Of course they can, but can they stop? According to this theory, no, they're not going to stop. At least that's what I think. Not gonna lie, most people probably want the classic, retire with MASH and live happily ever after ending. But let's be real, based on how things went with the previous MCs, that's not happening. Plus, it's so bland it'd turn this epic journey into just another generic story. From the devs' perspective, I feel like they'd still want Fujimaru, or at least their legacy, involved in future works. As for Mash's perspective, she doesn't really have friends outside of Chaldea and Master. Giving her an ending where she just sticks with Fujimaru forever feels like more of the same for her character. I think it's better if they give her a fresh ending, one that's not entirely tied to Fujimaru. Mash started out as a tool but ended up living a normal life, while Fujimaru started out normal and ended up becoming a tool for fate. Now no, I'm not talking about becoming another Emiya and ending up cursing their positive young self. No, what I'm talking about is as a wanderer. So with all that, this is my headcanon, or theory, or maybe a prediction of what's going to happen to the cast after everything is over. After the mission is over, and everything goes back to normal, assuming no one dies except the heroic spirits, there's this idea that they might all visit Fujimaru's house. Somehow. They need to do it now or never, because the probability they're hunted down by association is high. But for Fujimaru, things feel off. The mundane, everyday life just doesn't sit right anymore. He feels empty, like all those experiences have completely broken him inside. Even though the world is fixed, it doesn't feel like he belongs there anymore. Maybe Mash will be there to help, to get him to open up again. But even then, that itch, that feeling of needing something more than the normal, everyday life, won't go away. Deep down, something has changed. This is the phase in stories where the MC hits rock bottom before eventually finding their spark again. Like we talked about earlier, Fujimaru might end up being totally dead inside by the end. Usually, moments like these can be turned around by someone important to them or something that helps them open their heart again. That's why I mentioned Fujimaru becoming a wanderer. It's his way of dealing with this low point. Now the question is, what kind of wanderer would he be? Well, since he'd need to stay off the radar from mages for a while and focus on rediscovering his humanity, I picture him as some kind of timeline wanderer, hopping through dimensions, timeline, and space. Yeah, I know it sounds super far-fetched and a bit wild, but hear me out. There's already one character who went through something similar, and to this day, we still don't know why it happened or how it all plays out. Musashi Miyamoto. Musashi was introduced from the start as an entity who keeps jumping from one dimension to another, across time and space. The idea behind this comes from looking at what happened to Mash in the past. Mash started as a stiff, rule-following person who only lived to follow orders, until Dr. Roman and her journey with Fujimaru changed her, right? So, the idea is that Fujimaru might end up exploring different timelines and dimensions to rediscover their humanity, and this could be made possible with Musashi's dimension-hopping abilities. If you think about it, Musashi and Fujimaru have always clicked in a way that feels special. Honestly, I'd say Musashi is probably the heroic spirit closest to us besides Mash. In Shimosa, she even matched our energy perfectly, from the humor to the recklessness. It's like they were sharing the same brain cell. That's why I still believe Musashi will come back to us one day, and maybe somehow this dimension or timeline hopping ability will end up in Fujimaru's hands. Honestly, I like to imagine that Fujimaru would just pop up as a cameo in future Type Moon stories. It's a cool way to keep their legend alive in the lore. But what about Mash? I mentioned earlier that Mash might get an ending where she's not with Fujimaru, something fresh and different. So maybe Fujimaru ends up wandering alone, without Mash by his side. If in my headcanon Mash isn't with Fujimaru, then where does she go? This is where the rest of the cast comes in. If we're talking about someone who'd take care of a homunculus, obviously Gordolf would step up. So, in my headcanon, Gordolf adopts Mash, and she gets to live a normal life after all the fighting. She'd cherish every moment, living to the fullest, because that's what her senpai would have wanted. Sometimes, though, she'd look off into the distance, wondering what kind of adventure her senpai is on right now. As for the other staff, they'd probably have no trouble blending into society. Either Gordolf's money and connections would take care of it, or they'd just stay under the radar since the world barely knows they exist anyway. Alright, let's talk about the spicy stuff. Romance. Sure, the Fate series is known for being pretty dark, but let's be real, there's always a layer of romance mixed in. Always. And honestly, ships in this series have a way of becoming canon. Just look at Shiro, or Seek and John. Even the older series have that romantic vibe woven into the story. So, I'm convinced that if Fujimaru and Mash do end up parting ways, there's going to be some clear implication that they're in a relationship. I just feel it. Like, imagine something along the lines of, even if Fujimaru travels to the farthest corners of the world, there's still a place he can call home. And Mash will be there waiting for him. No NTR here, I'm sure of it. So even if Fujimaru travels far in the end, he'd come back to Mash once he's healed. I think this would be a solid ending if it actually happens. It gives room for Fujimaru to cameo freely in other Type Moon stories. Mash gets a fresh and independent ending without always being tied to her senpai. Gordolf and the rest of the cast maintain strong bonds, and the romance between Mash and Fujimaru could still be realized. Plus, the events hinted at in certain Bondcraft essences about adventures after our mission ends, like in Space Ishtar's Bond CE, could finally come to life. Of course, this is just my prediction, theory, or headcanon, call it whatever you want. What do you think? Don't forget to click subscribe and see you guys next time.